probably on YouTube. So yeah, if you want to listen back, then you'll be able to. So welcome to this panel on leveraging digital communities for inclusive sport. Thank you for joining. I'm Emma from Disability Sports Coach, and if you're not familiar with our charity already, we are a disability sport charity based in London. We've been operating since 2013 when we registered as a charity, and since then we've reached over 60,000 disabled people across the capital and beyond with community clubs, which are inclusive sport clubs in 13 London boroughs, along with coaching in schools, communities, and partnerships with national governing bodies, and lots more stuff like that, as well as training courses. And this is our kind of annual summer festival that has had to change a lot over the past couple of years, because usually we'd run it in person and we'd have lots of different providers coming along, but because of COVID this year we've kind of taken a bit of a dual approach, and we're running a few sessions online and hoping to reach out to the sector to share a little bit of our insight and to hear from some kind of change makers within the industry and the disability community themselves. So with that said, I'm really delighted to have two fantastic disability bloggers and lifestyle bloggers with us today. So I'd like to introduce you all to Shona Louise. Shona is a disability and lifestyle blogger. She's been blogging since she was 14 years old, which is quite incredible. And she's also a freelance writer who's written for The Metro, The Independent, Possibility Magazine, and various other publications, and is a photographer. And she kind of talks a lot about what it's like to live with long-term health condition, and exploring kind of the different ways that we can tackle ableism and make society more inclusive. So that's Shona. We also have Dee Reilly, who runs the blog David Ventures. And Dee has been very active for a very long time, with everything from cycling to skiing and hill walking. Dee is also even trialed for the British Paralympic team in paracycling, and is a speaker, a mentor, and shares lots of motivational experiences for disabled people and policymakers as well. So thank you so much both for joining. It's fantastic to have you both here sharing your kind of insight on your digital communities, because the whole purpose of this panel is to discuss the kind of emerging and ongoing role of digital communities in engaging disabled people in physical activity and well-being in a sustainable way. And we thought it would be really great to kind of incorporate your perspective, because you do have online communities that you've nurtured and grown over the years. So before I kind of hand over to you both, just a bit of background from our kind of insight over the past couple of years, because we've had to really transition to online delivery through the COVID-19 pandemic. And whilst we were kind of expecting there to be a lot of challenges, which there were, we've also found that it's created some real opportunities. We, like I said, taken our community clubs online, and we've been able to expand our reach across the world with people attending from Morocco and the US and other places. And we've found that 75% of our members have said that this has been invaluable in keeping them connected and active during the lockdown. So it's really brilliant for us to know. And we think that this means that the digital space is one that we as a society and the sports sector really need to nurture going forwards. So that's kind of the background for us. But now I'll hand over to our panelists to give a little brief introduction to themselves, if there's anything you'd like to say. Dee, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for having me along today. It's really nice to be part of this event, and it's really heartwarming to see the events. Why does Hannah in the first place? It's very, there's been some terrific advances in equality in sport, and so this is a great example of one. So I've been writing and blogging since about 2008. I started out blogging then, and I started writing for newspapers and journalism, and then I turned to the internet about 2014, and I've been writing on blogs since 2014. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I focus more on sport and outdoor sport, and yeah, I should say I've acquired quite a big following online, and as things progress, I went from writing onto filmmaking, and so now I make a lot of films about disability and outdoor sport, and things have gone from there. So that's me.
Fantastic, thank you, Dee. And Shona, would you like to introduce yourself and your blog at all?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Shona Louise. Like I said, I've been writing my blog since I was 14, so almost 10 years now. And I think, like a lot of disabled people who are across social media, I started writing my blog because I was quite isolated at school, and I sort of found a community that I sort of felt I fitted into more. But it took me a few years until I started talking about disability more. And I did that because the more I talked about it, the more the non-disabled people were saying, I'm learning so much. I had no idea these problems exist. But at the same time, you have other disabled people coming to you going, I can't believe, there's someone else out there that experiences this, and you kind of build a community through that as well. So my side of it is probably more to do with the online community spaces. But I enjoy swimming myself, and I took part in the superhero series triathlon a few years ago, which I would never have known about if it wasn't for the online disabled community.
That's fantastic. Thank you both. So I guess, Shona, you've touched on this a little bit in what you just said, but how you kind of started your blog, and I think you've both kind of mentioned that, but how did you kind of come to developing your community online, and how have you seen that kind of space change in the years that you've been blogging?
Yeah, so it was a kind of a natural process, really. I think the more you talk about something, the more that kind of naturally you build that space. And I think that for disabled people in particular, we so want to find our community and the people that relate to us. And, before social media, that was incredibly challenging to do. But now, thanks to social media and blogs and things like that, you can connect with people across the whole world who are going through something similar, who have sort of tips to share and advice. When it comes to my experiences swimming, a lot of what I do now, I've learned from other disabled people who I've sort of connected with online. So I think it's just about finding your group of people, really. I think these days it's fairly easy to do that. The more you talk about what you're passionate about, the more that community kind of builds. And I think going forward in the future, I think COVID has definitely shown us, but I think that is the way to go, really, in terms of building communities.
Absolutely agree. And Dee, what about you? Because you've been active for so long, and you've been member of groups in person as well. How do you think that the digital space has developed for you, as opposed to the in-person groups?
There's no doubt the digital platform has transformed things. Over the years, I've been writing for a long time. I think I started about 2008. And that was before social media and the digital space really came into being. And as time's gone on, it's created this amazing platform that you can get your work out to the whole world. And the way that I came in that position, I started writing in journalism in about 2008, and I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years. And I was writing about disability politics and disability rights and all sorts of stuff. I was phenomenally boring. I was boring my reader. I was boring myself. It was just miserable. And, you know, around, it must have been around 2014, you know, somebody said, you know, why don't you do or write about what you're passionate about, what you enjoy? And so around then, I started writing about disability sport and my experience in the outdoors in particular. And things just suddenly, it was amazing. People were suddenly a lot more interested in what I did, and I just found my niche in that area. So it just came from doing something and simply to make myself happy. You know, I didn't do it for other people, I did it for myself. But the consequence, the snowball effect has been tremendous. And that's been down to the digital communities and the proliferation in digital marketing over the years.
Amazing. It's great to hear for you both that the digital space has been so encouraging and supportive in becoming more active and exploring the various different sports and opportunities that are out there. What role would you say that sport and activity or even well-being kind of practices play in your life now? Dee, for example, I know you're very active and you do lots of different things. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, I keep active, you know, and I do a lot of different sports and activities, but it's not a passive thing. I do that almost like deliberately to stay healthy. You know, I've had in the past I've experienced about mental health problems, and so I look at my sport and my physical well-being almost like a necessity. It's like a job. It's like a must do to keep well, and it's kind of central to my well-being at the moment. I don't know, I'm very lucky. I've got the time, I've got the space to do that. You know, I know what some people do. It's hard to come across resources and opportunities, but at the moment I'm quite lucky. Got that opportunity, so I'm just making most of it.
Absolutely, that's a really important thing that you mentioned there. There are lots of different, intersectional barriers that a lot of disabled people face, and it really depends on your individual circumstances and many things like that. So we're all at kind of different stages in that journey to being active and embedding that into our lifestyles. And Shona, you kind of spoke a little bit already about the superhero triathlon. Was that a moment for you that really kind of was a pivotal point in your enjoyment and engagement in sport?
Absolutely. You know, I stopped doing PE at school in year 9 due to my health, and up until the point of doing the triathlon, I hadn't really engaged in much sport or activity. You know, I struggled to find something accessible, but also something that I enjoyed. So getting to take part in that, and also being surrounded by so many other disabled people who were doing things in their way with, loads of different adaptations and, different pieces of kit to enable us all to enjoy the day. It was just amazing to be surrounded by that kind of community, really. And I just loved it. And I don't think I realized sort of how important sport and activity and moving was until the pandemic hit. I don't think I would have classified myself as a particularly sporty person, but it wasn't until I wasn't able to go swimming that I realized how much I missed it, not just physically, in terms of losing muscle tone and things like that, but mentally as well, how much I needed that couple of hours in a pool every week, the difference it made to my well-being.
Absolutely, it can really be transformational just in terms of our rhythms and our outlook, I suppose, as well. And you kind of touched on there a little bit about not feeling particularly able to engage in sports, school, for example. And that's something that, we see is kind of an issue for many people across the board. What would you say are the kind of structural barriers in particular that contribute to a lack of access for disabled people within sport, or what would you like to change going forwards?
Yeah, I think access is a massive thing. Just having access to these different sports and, you know, the equipment as well, I think is a massive barrier for a lot of people. You know, it tends to be quite expensive and it's hard to know where you can access that for free in clubs and things like that. You know, it's not massively talked about. It's not until you kind of get into the middle of sort of disability communities that you start to find out these pieces of information of where you can go and try these things out. And so I think that's a massive barrier that, you know, a lot of people who are kind of on the outskirts of those communities, if they're new to being disabled, you know, aren't quite sure where to look or where to go to kind of access these things. So I think there's a few different things at play. And also I've had a lot of conversations with people who are afraid of taking part in sport because they think that, you know, those around them will think that they're, you know, faking their disability or exaggerating it, because there's kind of this idea that, well, if you can take part in sport, if you can do XYZ thing, then, you know, you can't really be disabled because of this concept of what disability is, when of course we all know that that's not true. So I think there are lots of different things that are at play, and sort of when everything lines up, it's amazing, but it does take quite a lot to get everything to line up, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I suppose that's why it's so important for organisations to work collaboratively across the board so that we can kind of tackle those from our different sort of speciality points. Yeah, that's really useful. Thank you. Dee, I suppose one thing that I could ask you in this sense is, as someone who has become quite regularly involved in a few different sports. Did you say it was cycling and skiing and what was the other one? So how did you find that you kind of managed to overcome the barriers, or what were the adaptations that you found useful in order to engage?
Well, all of the barriers that I faced have often been attitudinal barriers. For example, I'm very lucky that I can play sport. You know, I can go on the hills, I can play golf, and I do a lot of golf at the moment. But but the fact is that I have cerebral palsy, and I just don't have the same physical ability and stamina as other people. And one of the barriers that I faced over the years is that, you know, there was a lot of people, they were glad that you're there, glad that you were participating, but just not with them. And you know, it's because, you know, we have pretty busy lives, or more people do. I know if people got a Saturday to fill their leisure time, you know, they don't want to spend that day hanging around waiting on me. And in some ways, I can see that point of view, but I think it's been up to clubs, and it still is, and there's still a gap there that clubs and societies need to say, well, if we're gonna have disabled members, we're gonna have to make provision for them to participate regularly. And actually, no, I must say, yeah, I'm a member of a golf club, you know, then of course, and they are really good to me, and you know, and I'm getting to know people that just accept that, you know, I just don't have the same the ability as other people, and I'm finding people, I find people who support me and want to play with me and don't mind. And I'm finding other people who don't want to play with me and who've not got the patience. So you just have to accept that and find people who have got the patience and who support you.
Mm. And I suppose you kind of have both touched a little bit upon kind of representation there in terms of shifting narratives, and that seems like such an important one in terms of encouraging people to be more patient or open or understand ways to adapt in a sense that can be truly inclusive, and so that it's not just disabled people have to go to a disability sports club always. They can choose to do that, or also choose to kind of participate in mixed settings. So I wonder what role you think that social media and digital spaces can play in fostering that kind of inclusion and that raised awareness. Shona, in particular, almost a decade of blogging. How do you see that social media could or has changed things so far?
I mean, it's absolutely changed things massively. You know, when I first started blogging, not only were there not many disabled people, you know, doing the same thing and having that kind of platform and voice, but especially when it came to sport, there wasn't really anyone. And, you know, in the past few years, you know, we've had kind of the rise of sort of like gym influencers and, you know, things like that. And actually there has been a rise of disabled people in the same kind of spaces, you know, across Instagram, especially now. I follow quite a few disabled people who share just their everyday experience of sport and movement, and, you know, share how they adapt exercises and, you know, how they do things differently. And I think it's that kind of like everyday representation that kind of makes disabled people like myself think, okay, this, you know, this might be for me. You know, I think things like the Paralympics are amazing, but it's important to remember that they're elite athletes, and, you know, we really need that everyday representation as well.
Absolutely. That's kind of another question I was going to pose, so I'll kind of move into that area a little bit. Like you said, the Paralympics is fantastic, and this is such a moment of increased representation for the disabled community, particularly in sport. But Dee, from your perspective, how do you think we can keep the momentum going with this, and would you like to see society, the media, the sports sector, whatever aspect of it that you want to come at it from, kind of increase that representation for everyone?
Well, I think everybody has a role to play. You know, everybody from the television companies to the media companies to the papers, but right in the individual bloggers, like Shona and myself, they keep the momentum going and just keep pumping out positive images that reinforce the idea that sport is open to all and sport is for everybody. And you know, it is without getting better. You know, I've said for a while, and I still maintain that London 2012 was like a turning point. London 2012 changed everything. It was amazing. And you know, people like Channel 4 are, you know, it's getting a lot better, and representation on mainstream media is getting a bit better, but it's up to all of us to keep it in the forefront and keep it in the media. And we're all have a role to play now.
Absolutely agree with you both there. Do you think there is any particular way that we can continue fostering this digital space to become more inclusive, and things that in particular influencers or bloggers are doing or can do to continue encouraging people to engage in sport for their well-being, for enjoyment, whatever it is? Shona, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's like you said earlier about this idea that, you know, if you want to, you can attend a sort of a disability only club, but also we should be working harder to kind of create more mixed environments and, you know, make already existing environments more accessible rather than sort of separating people even more. So I think a lot of the focus going forward kind of needs to be on that and about proper inclusion, you know, not, you know, separating people off into, you know, each group, about making sure that all sports spaces are accessible, that, you know, anyone can rock up and be included. You know, I remember when I first started swimming, you know, I got to the swimming pool and they said, oh, we have a disability only, you know, session. I'm like, that's great, but, you know, I want to swim at any time of the day, you know, not just, you know, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening. And so it's that kind of thing. It's, you know, it's well intentioned kind of having these spaces, and absolutely these spaces are separate, but I think it's kind of increasing that inclusion within, you know, mixed spaces. And I think social media and especially influencers can play a massive part in that. And I think kind of the rise of more disabled influencers will help massively. You know, we talk to each other, we share our tips, we share our recommendations, and I think that's kind of where everything is kind of fostering and building, and that's, you know, where things are going now. You know, social media has meant that we can communicate with each other more easily, and we do talk to each other. And I think that, you know, that's important for everyone to remember, that, you know, we will share our experiences and, you know, what's gone well, what's not gone well, and kind of moving forward, utilizing that kind of space online is really important.
And in that sense, you can also kind of flag the barriers there, and hopefully that'll mean that whether it's facilities or groups will see, oh, this is how people are really experiencing our offering and the adaptations we might need to make. And again, I suppose in a sense, that's also a way that we as a sports sector need to kind of make sure that just because we have these provisions doesn't mean that everyone will necessarily know. And that's another way that the digital space can really be fostered, because we need to get the message out there that we do have these inclusive sports services and provisions. And I think often that's just a case that people haven't heard because it's not being talked about enough. So yeah, absolutely. Dee, did you have anything to add on that point at all?
Yeah, I was just nodding in agreement when you were saying, and people need to know what's happening, you know. I think a lot of people don't do this because they don't know that the provision, some provision does exist, and that they can take part in sport, you know. So it's about getting the information out there to people that they can do, and also, you know, to echo what Shona said, you know, clubs need to be open to disabled people as well as able bodies, because, you know, so many people say, well, there's a disability group meets at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. Well, you know, we've all got different lives, and, you know, and it's so it's healthier for people to be integrated into mainstream clubs and societies rather than having separate groups like ghettos or something like that. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of that.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. So following on from that, what would you like to see the sports sector and society in a more wide sense perhaps do in collaboration with digital communities like your own to enhance representation and inclusion in sport?
I think I would like them to try and get our message out to a wider audience, because although, you know, and people like Shona and I are doing great, and we've got the message out to some. There's a much bigger audience that don't see us. So I think I'd like to see mainstream media and the sort of bigger sports bodies making a bit more effort to promote the disabled sport. Not just once every 4 years when the Paralympics come on. It is great, but that they need to do that every year, not just for the Paras. So yeah.
So it's about amplification of those messages in a kind of consistent, sustained way. Shona, do you think that social media can be a way to channel this, a tool that we can use for a more kind of consistent messaging amongst the sports sector and on inclusion in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like Dee said, you know, a lot of people, they're not interacting in these things simply because they just don't know they exist. You know, it's like the triathlon I did, I had no idea that existed until it was, you know, recommended to me by other disabled people online. I think that is the key thing these days. You know, there are, you know, amazing in-person things, but how do you get that out to the people who want to know about it? And these days it's going to be on social media, you know, whether that's in Facebook groups or communities on Twitter or Instagram, or even, you know, places like TikTok now. You know, it's such a new and growing platform that reaches a whole new audience. You know, I think there's a lot of people who kind of feel quite forgotten about when it comes to sport. And I think, you know, as amazing as the Paralympics does, that kind of brings it up, you know, when it does come around, you know, and we kind of want that more sustained everyday representation and opportunities. You know, these are elite athletes, you know, and it's incredible, but it's kind of, I think people sometimes feel more shut out sometimes, you know, because they don't know how to even access kind of the basic things really. So I think being able to utilize online communities to kind of get that message out will, you know, help massively. You know, I don't necessarily, you know, have examples about sport, you know, but I'll share things about my experience as a disabled person, and people go, oh, I had no idea, you know, you did it like that, you know, I'll give that a go. And like I say, you know, we talk to each other so much that it would feel silly not to utilize those spaces now.
Absolutely, all about telling those stories of everyone who wants to be involved in sport, and, you know, a kind of balanced lifestyle of many opportunities in every sense. Are there any ways that you would like to see the digital space, or digital spaces, maybe I should say, themselves develop to become more inclusive, whether it's with better use of image descriptions, or, you know, technical things like that, or just you know, more representation of disabled influencers? Because, you know, there are, as you said, lots of brilliant disabled influencers and bloggers out there who really deserve more kind of airtime. Do you have any thoughts on that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just two things there. You know, when you're using social media and online spaces, you do need to be making sure that you're, you know, using things like image descriptions and captioning videos and things like that. I think it's especially important if you're specifically trying to reach a disabled audience, that we're kind of ticking those boxes to make sure that people can access the content, because there's so many times where I see, you know, even disability organizations share something and, you know, someone's commented underneath saying, well, I don't know what that picture is because there's no image description. You know, I think you'd be surprised by how often it happens. It's getting better, but yeah, absolutely, that is a massive part of it. And also, you know, utilizing disabled influencers. I think over the last 2 years, you know, I think across all industries, it's kind of got better in terms of, you know, the inclusion, and we have more diversity now, you know, in the campaigns we see. But I think sport and fitness is one of those ones that's kind of been lagging behind, because we have such a specific idea of what health looks like, of what fitness looks like. And so I think, you know, utilizing disabled influencers in that space, you know, will not only help disabled people feel included, but, you know, it also show that it is for everyone. It's not just for a very specific kind of person.
That's an absolutely brilliant point. Yeah, I completely agree. And Dee, is there anything that you would like to see in terms of, as Shona kind of said, representing, you know, everyone who's involved in sport, and how that looks and how that might manifest for different people through social media?
Yeah, you know, it's good to see. It's good to see disabled people, and disabled influencers. Unfortunately, no, you know, one of the things about social media, you know, is whoever can set the loudest and get the biggest following, and disabled people are getting there. But it's, you know, it's quite difficult, and what they could do to get more visibility, but if they could get more visibility, it would be great. So that's what was in my head.
Oh no, is it gone?
It's there. Yeah, it's gone. So, sorry, distraction.
Thank you, that's brilliant. So I suppose the kind of last specific question I have for you both is more an opportunity really to share any recommendations that you'd like to share with our audience on whether it's disability focused blogs or podcasts or communities, or kind of anything that you think the sports sector in particular should be interacting with to improve our understanding of inclusion. Dee, do you have any recommendations you'd like to share?
Well, you know, I think there's so many great blogs and podcasts you know, and it's difficult to name one. But I think if people look around themselves, they'll find lots of great examples, and that they should spend the time, you know, engaging in them. That does open your ideas and thoughts about inclusion and well-being. So I'm just encouraging people to have a look at what's out there, because it's not hard to find.
Yeah, it's kind of doing that research, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yourselves. Shona, do you have any anything you'd like to share?
I do have one very specific recommendation. There's someone on Instagram called @SophJButler, and she's kind of one of these disabled influencers that I was talking about, that kind of, she shares her everyday experiences of exercise and movement, and you know, she goes to the gym and shares her adapted exercises as she has a spinal cord injury. And for me, it's the kind of those everyday representations and, you know, experiences that have made a difference to me. And I never would have thought that a gym would be an environment that I'd ever be comfortable in, but seeing other people in those spaces has made a big difference.
That's brilliant. And is there anything that you would like to plug for yourself before we go to take questions from the audience?
Yeah, so my blog is shonalouise.com, and you can find me across social media at Shona Louise blog.
Perfect. And Dee, is there anything, would you like to plug your website or anything else at all?
Yeah, you can find me at my website is deereilly.org, and that tells you about my speaking and book writing. And also I have a YouTube channel where my videos, and you can find me on YouTube under Dee Reilly.
Great. I'll try to put these in the comments section at the end of the session. Thank you both so much for speaking. That's been fantastic to have your insights. And now I'll hand over just for 10 minutes of any questions, if anyone has any. You can unmute yourself and ask anything you'd like to. Anyone got any questions?
I have one question, Emma.
Amadee, I think that is.
I'll get my video on. There we go. Cheers. Thanks so much, Emma. Thanks so much, Dee and Tig as well. That was really, really great and really insightful. And I was just making lots of notes throughout that. Shona, I just want to touch on something you mentioned a bit earlier about your experience at schools and of PE, and how kind of you were forced to leave after year 9 from doing your PE and from taking part in those activities. From your experience of social media and raising awareness of disability through social media, how can schools get involved, and how can you bridge that gap to raise awareness of the need to be active among disabled people in schools and young people? It's something that I'm just very curious how we can get primary schools and people at secondary schools also involved and aware of that as well.
Yeah, I think it's about kind of presenting more accessible opportunities, especially in schools. You know, I think there's still kind of an idea that all disabled children, you know, go to schools, you know, with other disabled children, and we're not in mainstream schools, but you know, that's not the case, and we're kind of pushing more and more for disabled people to be in mainstream environments. So I think it's really important that we kind of keep up with that in terms of PE. You know, at school they always pushed how important PE was, but you know, as soon as I said, you know, these options aren't accessible to me, I was put in the library to, you know, go and catch up on work instead of taking part. You know, there was no effort really to try and find more accessible versions of what they were doing. And so I think it's really important that schools make that effort and, you know, talk to their disabled students about what they'd like or what they might need. You know, my school started doing things like karate, you know, but there was never a question of, you know, well, would you like us to bring in some more accessible options? You know, they were offering all of these different sports that weren't even providing kind of the basics that as a disabled person I needed. And so I think it's really important to have more of those conversations about, you know, making things more accessible, bringing in different options, you know, bringing in people from outside to give talks, and, you know, just showing more inclusion really, rather than, you know, assuming that you can't meet someone's needs or that there aren't options for them. You know, we don't all fit in neat little boxes, and I think that's really important that schools kind of catch up with that now.
It's really insightful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amity and Shona. Do we have any other questions from anyone else at all? Okay, if there aren't any more questions, then I guess we can wrap up, unless there's anything that Shona or Dee would like to add finally. Okay, great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to Shona and to Dee for coming along and sharing their insight. It's been fantastic to have you. And yes, as they both said, do head over to their websites. I've popped them in the comments section, and you'll also be able to find YouTube channels, social media, all of that good stuff there as well. And yeah, that if you don't follow many disabled influencers yet, then this is your open door into doing so. So yeah, thank you very much for joining.
Emma, there
yeah.
seems to be a question in the comments section.
Oh, hang on. Oh, sorry, Hannah, I didn't see that one. Okay, so Hannah has asked, if you guys don't mind answering this question, do you think that raising awareness among non-disabled people is equally as important in order so they know you exist as an organisation or person? Dee, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think it is equally important because able-bodied people take part in able-bodied sports company, as Shona said. I can equally know that the same way we're doing, we don't want separate clubs, don't want to go to a different place. So I think it is imperative to let able-bodied people know what profession is out there, so they know that they can include and incorporate disabled people into the life and works of a club. Any club, so yeah, it's a good point. I think it is worthwhile.
That's a very good point. Shona, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just completely agree with that, really. You know, in terms of my own online activism and community, it's very much split into disabled people who can relate to me and then non-disabled people who are learning from me. And I think both of those kind of sides of the, you know, are really important, that we, you know, we are reaching the people who need the services, but also it's often non-disabled people who hold the keys and, you know, the finances and things like that to create more spaces like this. So it's absolutely important.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so I can't see any other questions. If anyone has any, unmute now. Yeah.
Now, I was going to say thank you very much for having me along today. It's really nice to be part of it, and I really admire your work. And thank you very much for inviting me along.
Thank you so much for joining. It's been brilliant to hear from you. Yeah, thank you both. And I should say for everyone watching, as you know, we are a charity. So if you would like to support our work in sharing inclusive sport with the community in London and beyond, then you can donate if you'd like to by texting DSC5 to 70085. Or otherwise, if you just want to learn more about what we do, you can visit disabilitysportscoach.co.uk. So that's everything from us. Next up, we have a baking session for anyone who'd like to come along. It's not really baking this time, it's more kind of cooking. We're making flatbread pizzas. So that's at 4 on the same Zoom link if anyone would like to join. And particularly for people who work in the sports sector, you might be interested to know that we have another panel tomorrow at the same time as this from 2 till 3, which is kind of looking at why community is key in the future of inclusive sport. And we have speakers from Activity Alliance, the Peter Harrison Centre for Disability Sport, which is at Loughborough University, and the Exercise app, which was founded by a Paralympian. So that will be tomorrow on the same link if you're interested. I think that's everything from me. Thank you again so much to Shona and Dee. And yeah, we look forward to seeing everything you do next. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will probably end this call in 30 seconds. So just to let you all know, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, everyone. Bye.